Um, Welcome, everybody. We're here at our final breakout session of this year's Information Literacy Summit. It's really exciting to have you all here with us throughout the day. And especially thank you to our presenters for giving us such an interesting topic to kind of close out our discussion on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sveta. I'm a librarian at DePaul University. And I'm one of the co-organizers of the conference. My colleague Shannon is here helping to moderate and facilitate the Q&A. So thank you to Shannon. And without further ado, this session is presented to us by Emily Alford, the head of government information maps and microform services at Indiana University Bloomington, and Meredith Knoff, the Learning Commons librarian, also at IU Bloomington. Their presentation, Information Literacy as Voting Literacy, Creating a Consultation Service to Educate Students about the Electoral Process, is going to share about their experience creating a one-on-one consultation service for students focused on voter registration, searching for and evaluating electoral information about candidates, ballot measures, and identifying bias in those information sources. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this presentation and also to your questions. We'll have some time for questions at the end, but if things come to you, just feel free to put them in the chat and we'll kind of get back to them. And let me also turn on so if you need closed captioning, look at for the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It should be on, and you should be able to see the subtitles as we go. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Emily and Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you, Sveta. So thank you everyone for ending your day with us. We really appreciate you being here. We are going to be talking about our voting literacy consultations. So in our session, we're going to explore a voting literacy consultation service that was implemented during the 2020 presidential election. The system was created in partnership with IU's participation in the Big Ten Voting Challenge and embedded into an existing research consultation service. We'll review outreach and advertising techniques used for the service, the impact of pivoting to an online-only service due to the COVID pandemic, and future plans for our service.
So the Big Ten Voting Challenge, commonly abbreviated as BTVC, is an election-based competition between the 14 universities comprising the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Campuses compete for two separate titles, the greatest overall turnout, as well as the greatest increase in voting rates. Data from the National Study on Learning, Voting, and Engagement are used to determine the winners. For the midterm elections in 2018, Indiana University libraries contributed to overall campus efforts, primarily through tabling in the lobby of our flagship library. We had information, resources, and staff present several afternoons a week to assist students in voter registration, learning where their polls were located, and guides on how to be an informed voter. We had big plans for in-person initiatives leading into the 2020 presidential election. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, most of our efforts ended up being virtual. We'll provide details on these programs today.
Sorry about that. My laptop had a Friday afternoon freak out. So in deciding to situate a voting literacy consultation service, we decided to implement using the pre-existing Learning Commons Research Desk. So the Learning Commons Research Desk offers one-on-one research consultations for students at all stages of their research process. Our primary focus is on helping students build their research strategy, define an information need, learn how to use library resources like databases in the library catalog, evaluate resources, learn how to talk about their research process, and build information literacy skills and practices. Students can schedule a consultation in advance or drop in, and the desk is primarily staffed by graduate students in IU's library science program, who are called research assistants. These students receive advanced training from our subject librarians and also learn different pedagogical techniques to use at the desk, including inquiry-based learning and universal design for learning practices. Additionally, students learn about both library and campus research support in order to facilitate referrals where students can access more in-depth help. The desk is open Sunday through Friday from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Because the desk already operates in a way that prioritizes learning and a dialogic approach to research, it was easily adapted to include conversations around civic engagement and voting literacy. We wanted to use the service model to help students make connections between the kind of research they did for their courses and their lives beyond the classroom and graduation. When students are making appointments at the learning desk, we use a booking form and added the option for a specific voting literacy consultation and help with registering to vote. Language was also added to the desk's web presence to help identify the service as one that hosted these conversations and questions. Other public service desks in the libraries also received information about the service to help facilitate referrals. When designing the service, we wanted our voter literacy consultations to focus on critical thinking skills that pulled from information literacy habits and practices. Voting literacy topics included how to create a voting action plan, researching ballot initiatives, candidate information, voting records and their positions on different issues, and using evaluative techniques to identify bias. Through these consultations, we wanted to help students understand that the same kinds of questions they asked about sources they used for coursework applied to information that they used in their daily lives. We also wanted them to know that they will still be able to locate trusted or vetted sources of information around these topics and issues even after they leave college, despite losing access to their school's library resources. Many of these types of sources, while freely available, can be difficult to locate and not always written in plain language. While we couldn't translate or explain legal or political concepts to students, we could at least show them how to locate more resources that students deemed trustworthy to better understand the information they were finding. As a public state-funded organization, there were very real limitations and restrictions to how we could talk to students about these issues. While we couldn't promote or signal support for any political party, candidate, or issue, we could use open-ended questions focused on the sources, using pedagogical practices like inquiry-based learning to help stimulate critical thinking and evaluation on the student's part when it came to these types of questions. So questions we encourage students to consider that sort of focused on information literacy included, what's the difference between a newspaper reporter and someone working for a campaign and the kind of information they produce? Why should I use multiple sources to fully understand a candidate's position? Why is it sometimes more expensive to access newspaper coverage compared to campaign information? And why does that matter? And how does the tone and content differ between these two information products? So the primary frames that we had tied to these kinds of questions from the framework were authority is constructing contextual, searching as a strategic exploration, and information has value.
Through the students staffing the Learning Commons Research Desk, virtual assistance was able to be offered leading up to the 2020 election. There were 2 series of virtual drop-in hours offered. Registration assistance drop-in hours were provided for those needing assistance navigating the voter registration process and a chance to ask questions on identifying poll locations and hours, mail-in voting processes, and out-of-state voting. Voting literacy drop-in hours were offered once registration closed in Indiana. Here, students could log in and receive assistance discovering these valuable resources to help make informed ballot decisions. To help prepare our students to be able to thoroughly provide voting literacy assistance, we train them on definitions, legislation resources, and a comprehensive background on voting in America. Students were connected with tools to determine and locate congressional districts along with voting precinct maps. Resources and tools for analyzing information were presented, such as the CRAP test, which demonstrates how to assess a resource based on currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Finally, we introduced the graduates to useful bipartisan aggregation sites, such as Ballotpedia, VoteSmart, and Vote 411, a sort of one-stop shop launched by the League of Women Voters Education Fund, which provides nonpartisan information to the public with both general and state-specific information on all aspects of the election process. With an online voting resource guide, drop-in virtual assistance hours, evening workshops, and even several election-themed playlists, we had a lot to promote. Connecting with internal colleagues within the library system, as well as campus partners, allowed us to spread the word most effectively. We utilized the IU libraries as well as campus communications teams to promote our services and events on social media platforms, including Twitter, Facebook, as well as through Instagram stories. The university student newspaper also featured the library's initiatives in an article. In addition to our virtual drop-in hours, we also connected with social media and other campus outlets to promote our Democracy Gathering series, which consisted of both internal and external speakers sharing further library resources and discussing a range of topics important to all voters. The primary campus group initiating BTVC efforts at Indiana University is the Political and Civic Engagement Program, whose events we promoted through our own channels and vice versa. At its core, PACE is an interdisciplinary certificate program combining academic research and hands-on education. We have worked increasingly with PACE over the past few election cycles to complement existing programming, as well as fill in the gaps with our voting literacy instruction measures. To encourage lasting civic engagement and discussion post-election, we held our final democracy gathering titled "No Deadline for Democracy" after Election Day. This talk featured a member of our local Black Lives Matter group, as well as a member of the local League of Women Voters.
So like every area of campus and every campus, the Big Ten Voting Challenge and our voter literacy consultations were very heavily impacted by the COVID pandemic. Prior to the 2020 semester, the research desk only offered in-person assistance. When IU shifted to remote learning in March of 2020, the desk moved to online consultations only and remained this way through the 2020-21 academic year. Using Zoom, students could still choose to schedule in advance or log in for a drop-in consultation. Graduate students received training to use Zoom features like the whiteboard and screen share, while also using the waiting room to help maintain student privacy. So overall, desk stats were down. The best example I can give is that our scheduled consultations went down about 45% compared to the 2018-2019 school year. Because of this, our visibility was obviously very heavily impacted. Library use itself was only by reservation. And so overall library use was also down, which means we lost sort of our biggest visibility and highest profile outreach attempts. This included things like tabling in the lobby. The Wells Library, which is our main library, is located at sort of the connection between dormitories on campus and the rest of campus. So we are very lucky at catching people when they're coming through our lobby. And during the 2018 midterm election cycle, that was where we primarily interacted with students. Without that, we really lost sort of a grounding to be able to catch people. That being said, we still did have quite a few people come through. We did have a Google form to track how many times people interacted with us, but since all of our graduate students were working from home, it was hard to collect consistent statistics. Emily, I'm going to let you share about the overall outcomes.
Yeah, so it takes a while for the data to come out, but we did recently find out that Indiana's university student voter turnout saw a 22% increase from 2016 to 2020. So we did not win either of the largest overall voter turnout or overall increase, but we were very, very happy with our increase between presidential elections, especially given the fact that all of our outreach and everything was done virtually, as well as the election process happened right during the pandemic too.
So this is a project and initiative that has grown significantly, even just within the last 4 years. As we ramp up for another midterm election cycle, Emily and I have just started planning and sort of getting ready for fall of 2022. We do definitely have more future plans. This includes more interactive elements with trainings as far as RA goes, since we will, and hopefully and in theory, still be back in person how we are for this semester. Looking to create more active check-ins and include RAs and other outreach programming to make sure they have a even better further understanding of the election process and civic engagement to really encourage those discussions happening at the desk. Also figure out ways to develop higher visibility at the physical research desk that better advertises the specific service itself instead of relying on it being embedded in our traditional and regularly offered research services. That was our very brief and sort of bird's eye view of the consultation service we ran. As Emily mentioned, we did have a programming series initiative that went hand in hand with our Big Ten Voting Challenge outreach efforts. But we wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to talk about sort of what this process looks like, things that would need to happen at everyone else's either home institutions or home libraries to help adapt this kind of thing, or any other resources that we've created around voting literacy and civic engagement or campus partnerships that we've created.
Thank you so much, Emily and Meredith. That was excellent. The information you shared with students is so incredibly valuable for these new voters. So we have lots of time left for questions. So if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you can ask your questions directly, or otherwise just put them into chat and then I'll read them out loud. Let's see.
I've got a quick question to start us off. I'm curious if you have any kind of anecdotal or qualitative reflections on the kinds of questions students asked, how they responded to this initiative, in addition to the pretty impressive increase in voter turnout from the university.
Yeah, so I do meet with my graduate students once a week, and discussions around this did come up. I think they overall were pretty disappointed with the lack of engagement, which I think really did just come down to the COVID situation. A lot of them, most of the interactions did focus on voter registration, less on the voting literacy. It's part of why I think one of our main goals coming into the next election cycle is to figure out how to make that component of it more obvious or more, apparent compared to just the voting registration itself. I think that can be really difficult. September, we saw I think the biggest amount of interactions, and that was more just, I need to figure out how to vote. Emily, I think, can back me up on this. There's always so many questions about out of state. Since we're a big R1, we pull a lot of students from surrounding states. Emily is originally from Ohio and I'm originally from Illinois, so it works out really well for us knowing our own home states, electoral and election processes. But I think that's where a lot of the information ended up kind of centering on. And it was hard for students to really open up that conversation to the next step. Since this was our very first kind of go around with it, I think that outside of like the PACE office, we aren't traditionally identified as a place on campus to get information outside of coursework. And so that's a big transition that I think really has to happen in order to get a lot of these conversations to gain more traction on campus, is identifying ourselves as, information professionals that can help in all realms of information and not just with academic work.
Yeah.
And I think it also provides an opportunity, outside of coursework. Again, it's somewhere that we can provide information, events like the census. We also did a good deal of outreach leading up to that. And especially coming right off of the 2018 midterm, realizing civic engagement is a place where we can connect with our undergraduate students, and it's a big learning opportunity. So the census and even things, outside of election years, just informing our students on, how to contact their congressional leaders and how to really be involved on all levels. I think, it's very exciting when there's a presidential election year, but there's a lot that we can do coming up for the midterm too. And I think it really places an emphasis on voting literacy on those smaller elections.
I'm curious if y'all have any plans to kind of extend this to local elections in Bloomington or like state Senate, those kinds of races that folks might be paying less attention to even than congressional elections.
So we do include any local and state information in the sort of consultations themselves. So students get trained on how to find local candidates, state candidates, even things like judicial candidates, which I think can kind of be the most difficult to find information on. So that's included in sort of their familiarity. I think, at least from an IU Bloomington context, the tone around campus has shifted a little bit more to be more aware of that sort of state and local connection. One of the things, I think this got addressed more, and Emily, feel free to add on or contradict, but I think we addressed this a little bit more through our programming series. So we hosted a series of 4, again, Emily mentioned democracy gatherings, and we partnered with community groups around Bloomington, including, you know, Black Lives Matter Bloomington, and the Monroe County, which is our county, League of Women Voters. And I think that did a lot to highlight that sort of more local state connection compared to the federal one. Emily, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, definitely. I just shared with everyone we used LibGuides for our big election guide that got promoted all around campus. And there's sections in there specifically on how to find information on local matters and pretty widespread. You can also find our playlists on there. I think we mentioned briefly that our media librarian put out a bunch of election themed playlists, and those are pretty cool. So that's still on there as well. And that will kind of give an idea too of the wide spectrum of voting literacy aspects that we were preparing students with.
I think too, and it shows the LibGuide got, I mean, for a LibGuide, I think the LibGuide got an incredible amount of hits and engagement on it, and not just sort of went the landing page and that's it. And that was a lot more prominently featured. And given the timing of everything, I think students were more oriented and more comfortable doing that sort of passive, non-engaged sort of information gathering process. So we know that students want this information, and we know that there's a need and sort of that seeking process to get it on campus. I think now the really big, you know, effort as far as coming into 2022 is going to be figuring out how to now fit that sort of engagement gap when it comes to that actual face-to-face discussion.
Absolutely.
I have a question. I wondered if you reached out to faculty members at all, like in political science, or, you know, and told them about this and asked if they could talk about it in their classes.
Yeah, we actually, within PACE and the Big Ten Voting Challenge, there's a steering committee, which I serve on for like leading up to elections and what campus initiatives we're going to do for BTVC. So there are faculty members on there, and they promote pretty much everything with most of their courses. So we're lucky with that. We also had one of the professors, Gerald Wright, of political science at IU, as one of our featured speakers during the virtual democracy gatherings.
We also went straight to our subject librarians and asked them to reach out to their faculty. I think that worked really well. One of our sessions we hosted was an actual voting literacy sort of instruction workshop that walks students through a lot of these processes. We got a surprising number of turnout, and I think it was because a specific faculty member had, Emily, I want to say they offered it as extra credit if they attended. Am I right about that?
I think that was the bold ballots. Yeah. So that one's called Bold Ballots, Keys to Voting with Confidence. And we actually had that. It was just myself and our grad students each took a separate section. They did, you know, the CRAP test as voting literacy and different tools for analysis like that. But yeah, I do believe that that was the one that got the extra credit for folks.
I think the other reason why doing it at a service, and I mean, I always have to acknowledge that at IU, we do have a certain level of privilege by having a library school because we do get to rely heavily on our graduate students. But the desk itself is built around a peer-assisted learning model. And I think in a lot of these types of conversations, students really will feel more comfortable approaching, you know, non-intimidating sources. I think they'll feel more comfortable talking to other students about these kinds of questions. I think they come up more organically, specifically on these topics. And so that was another, I think, one of our reasonings for putting it into this model, not just because it was already running and kind of lent itself well to it, but because the actual faces of it might be more approachable.
Yeah, definitely. We also have students, peer reference tutors at our reference desk, and I do feel like sometimes they're less intimidating than librarians, so that's great that you do that too.
I will say, so Emily does come and teach my graduate students about searching for government sources in non-election years too. And I can't necessarily track if they're talking about sort of civic engagement topics, but that is one of the training sessions they go through that gets cited as the most useful. So I think I'm fully guessing and speculating on this, but I think those conversations are still happening. I know a lot of public government data has gotten used in the last couple of years because of tracking COVID information, and I think all of those things kind of come together in these kinds of spaces and these discussions.
Good point. Definitely. More questions? What time is it? Oh, we've got some time. Okay, well, if people are pretty much done, I wanted to thank Emily and Meredith for their presentation, and thank you to everyone also for attending the Information Literacy Summit.